James, can you give us some examples of some exercises that you walk through with your clients?
Yeah, number one being if you're going through this transition, you really need to understand all of your benefits. So that's step one. What's the health coverage option? Do you have retiree health care? Do you have COBRA insurance? Or are you going to have to pay for something more expensive in the private market? What does your severance look like? Is it a 6-month severance? Is it a year severance? Are they doing it based off age and years of service? It's all company specific, but that's really what you got to hone in on, and all the benefits, so we're not leaving any money, on the table. And then the next would be, once you figured out what you're offered through the company, then you got to figure out your personal inventory, right? All of the assets that you have. So that's looking at the 401k, the pension. That's a big question that comes up. Are we going to take a lump sum versus a monthly annuity? What type of debts, liabilities do we have? And you just got to take an inventory of all of those assets.
And how does someone do that? It just seems like a lot of different areas that we would have to go and collect that information.
Yeah, the number one being, if you work with us, we always go through a data gathering worksheet. We'll sit down, send you a document, and we just have an open discussion. We list all of the assets you have, and that's pretty easy. Most of our clients have a 401k. If they're lucky enough to be in oil and gas, they typically have a pension. If we're looking at any deferred comp, IRAs, Roth IRAs, and then just cash savings at the end of the day. And then once we get all of that information, that's when we really start breaking down the numbers of each type of benefit that they have.
And a great thought comes up. Which bucket do we pull from first? All those different areas that you just described. How do I know which one to pull on?
Yeah, that's when we really need to figure out your budget, the assets you have. Then what we have to do is basically create a tax efficient withdrawal strategy.
And what does that process look like?
Yeah, at the end of the day, what we're trying to achieve is recreating your paycheck in retirement. So how does that look like? We've already taken an assessment of all of the assets. So I look at it like a three-pronged approach, but most people, we have our savings. That's your 401k, IRAs, any brokerage accounts. And then if we're lucky enough to have a pension, that's becoming more rare. But if you do have a pension, are we going to take a lump sum, a monthly annuity option? And then we look at Social Security finally. That's the government pension. What age are we going to start taking distributions? Is that 62, the earliest, or is that age 70? And so our job as advisors is to sit down and really, recreate your paycheck and figure out what's the most tax efficient way to take distributions. So whenever we go through the financial plan and we plug in all of the numbers, we might start off, if you've ever heard of a 4% withdrawal strategy. There's a lot of rules of thumb in the industry. 4% is a great one to get started on. So how that was developed, it was a mathematician from MIT in the 90s, and he said, based off a conservative portfolio, if you take 4% out of your investments, your portfolio will last on average about 30 years, 90% of the time. That's more of a rule of thumb, and that's not taking into account Social Security. And then another option would be looking at a bucket strategy approach to taking withdrawals in retirement. So how that looks, you have your near-term bucket. We look at this as 3 different buckets. You have your near-term, and that's where we want to have more conservative investments. That might be cash from a severance that we want to keep aside for that first 1 to 3 years in retirement. And then we have our second bucket, and that's maybe a little bit more dividend-paying stocks, income-producing investments, high-quality bonds. And then we have our third bucket, and that can be more growth-oriented. And as we move through retirement, those buckets move with us, and we're always replenishing that near-term bucket. And then you have a dynamic withdrawal strategy. And that's basically, if we have a great year like we've had this year and your portfolio has gone up, we might be able to pull out some extra distribution this year. Or vice versa, if we're looking at, March of 2020 and the market's down 30%. Well, luckily we've already honed in on your discretionary and essential expenses, so we know where to cut back and maybe lower your withdrawal. And looking at all 3 areas, helps define a tax smart distribution plan.